And so sustained happiness is possible when self-love is present.
This is the Deep Dive with Adam Roa.
What's up, deep divers? Thank you for joining me for another episode of the Deep Dive. Today is a deep dive musing. It's me, your host, Adam Roa, and we are just diving into what's going on. What's going on right now in my field? What's going on in the world? What am I thinking about various things? And specifically, it is a new decade. 2019 has come to an end. All the teens are done. And now we're in the 20s. 2020 vision. 2020 is a year that I feel is going to be massive for so many people. And one of the questions that I was asked during a New Year's Eve gathering was, what is the lesson that you learned from the last decade? What would you say if you could encapsulate those 10 years into one lesson? What would it be? And I said, pretty much without hesitation, I learned how to love myself. If I could really define this last decade, it was I learned how to love myself. And so in this podcast, I just want to dive into that real briefly about what does that actually mean? How did I learn that, and why it's so important? Because I do believe it is the foundation upon which your entire life, happiness and success and all those things is built. Before I do that, I just want to remind you, as the beginning of the year starts, it is incredibly, incredibly important for you. Just like, how they say your mornings are going to set the tone for the rest of your day. The beginning of the year can set the tone for the rest of the year. And so I want to invite you to really look at what are ways in which you can develop some positive habits right off the bat and begin to implement those and embody those in your life. And I have on my website, adamroa.com, I have a variety of different tools for you to be able to utilize to make that process easier. So if you don't journal yet, I encourage you to go and get the journal. It's a self-love journal. It says treat yourself like someone you love right on the front of it as a reminder every time you see it, every time you pick it up, to fill yourself with some love. I have my book, Treat Yourself Like Someone You Love, which has 3 tools to make self-love easier. I have my album, which is there to take you on a personal development journey through poetry and music and storytelling. And then I have my Permission Essential Oil, which is a blend of really sacred plants that are used in ceremonies to clear energy and carry powerful intention setting. So you can carry that oil with you and just drop into a present moment with it. And it's been custom designed by a dear sister of mine. So there's just these tools, and I wanted to just bring your attention to it because I use these tools in my everyday life. They make a huge difference. And if you don't have tools that you're using, I encourage you, head over to adamroa.com, check those out. And the whole point of that is because this is about self-love. This podcast, this life, all of it is about self-love. Because what I've realized is that for my entire life, right, as being someone who had been molested at a young age, being someone who my father's from the Philippines, and the form of discipline was physical, right, with belts and things. And so I grew up not really feeling safe. I grew up I was a very late bloomer. I didn't hit puberty until way later than everybody else. And so I felt like I needed to overcompensate in a lot of ways. And so my achievements became the thing that I would hang my hat on, so to speak. What I accomplished, I would say that's what gives me my worth. And so I spent my entire life basically trying to prove something to myself and to everybody else. And I, mental health issues and depression, it runs in my family. And so I have battled depression on and off for most of my life. And it really came to maybe one of the deepest, if not the deepest depression I've ever faced in my whole life, which was in 2019 for several months. And I was really struggling. I had thoughts. They were, I call them, they were suicidal thoughts, but they weren't about killing myself necessarily. They were more about just like no longer wanting to live. I know that sounds like it's just a difference, but it was just like, I don't want to be here. I'm tired. And like all of these things that was a part of my experience, because I just didn't think I could ever snap out of this pain that I was experiencing. And so I went through this last decade, and specifically over the last several months, the end of the decade in 2019 was the first period of my life where I was no longer in a romantic partnership. And so there was no way for me to go to this old pattern of feeling depressed, feeling sad, and really leaning into someone else to fix that for me, to make me feel better. And that was a big belief that I uncovered within myself, was that I had felt for most of my life that relationships are supposed to make you happy. Like your romantic partner should be able to help you in those periods where you feel low. And because of that, most of my life I had been in relationship, and therefore when I hit these really low periods, I would lean in to my romantic partners to help me snap out of it. And so over the last several months of being single, there wasn't that. It was me. It was just me. And my goal for my life, like truly, if I could say there is one goal that I have that above all else, is sustained happiness. And that doesn't mean never feeling sad. That just means that my default state of being is happy. I'm one of those people where people look at me and go, he's just so happy. He loves life. It's amazing. Like I want to be one of those people. And so to be one of those people, I call sustained happiness. And this is what I've realized about sustained happiness. Sustained happiness has to be cultivated solo. Sustained happiness, self-love being the key to that. Because if you have love, you're happy, right? Like if you love yourself, it feels good. There's happiness. That's where you find your happiness. Because otherwise, where does your happiness come from? The external world of, oh, this feels good, this happened, that's awesome. And so that these external things, my being around my friend makes me happy, being in my romantic partner, making more money makes me whatever it is, but it's still external. So internally, where is that found? Internally, happiness is found through the self-love. Because that feeling emotes happiness. It feels good to love yourself. And so sustained happiness is possible when self-love is present. And how is self-love cultivated? And why is sustained happiness needing self-love to be developed solo? Because in those moments, in the toughest moments, in the ones that are the hardest and the darkest and the most difficult to be with, you feel alone. In my depression, when I was deep in it, I was in a romantic partnership. I had friends all around me, and I felt completely alone. And that is something that is incredibly common when people are struggling with whatever it is that they may be struggling with. They feel alone. And so in those moments, if you know that you are there, you always have your own back, then you're not alone in the way that most people feel alone. Because the by myself aspect of that is no longer isolated. You have a relationship with yourself. And I'm not sure if that makes sense, but for all of you who are on this self-love journey, in the loneliest of moments, if you can see that as not being isolated, but instead being with yourself, it's a completely different perspective. It's a different mindset. And now imagine you have that mindset of being with yourself in those moments. The difference that happens when being with yourself is being with someone you dislike versus being with someone you love. In those moments of deep pain and sadness, to be with someone you love is a game changer. That means that no matter what happens in your life, no matter what external circumstances arise, you will always, always, always be with someone you love. Love will always be present everywhere you go in each and every moment. That is the power of self-love. No one can take that away from you. No matter what happens externally, no one can take away the love you have for yourself. And that is why self-love is the foundation for sustainable happiness. Because there's nothing externally that can shift that. And love emotes happiness. And so when I've been going through some of these really difficult periods of time where I miss my previous partner and I feel lonely and I'm like, wow, I'm traveling on the road so much and I don't really get an opportunity to create like deep new friendships or like develop any kind of romantic partnerships, or like because I'm moving so much and shifting. And that's a story, by the way. That's not necessarily true. That's just the story that I go into when I'm like feeling extra lonely. And in those moments, I tune in. I do a lot of different practices that I've used to cultivate my self-love, right? So the stretching, the meditating, the journaling, the playing music, the reading, the cooking for myself. Like I do a variety of things that I do as an act of self-love. And I remember that I always have my own back. I don't need anyone else. And it feels good to show up for me. It feels good to show up for me. And so now, as I move into 2020 and the rest of my life, I know that if I continue to show up for me, because it is a relationship, don't forget that just like a friendship, if you don't ever call the person, if you don't ever hang out with the person, if you don't ever make an effort to maintain a relationship, the relationship will fade. So my relationship with myself is going to be a representation of how much energy I put into that relationship. As long as I continue to put energy and love into the relationship with myself, it will continue to deepen my level of self-love and the love I have for me in each and every moment. And that will be the wellspring from which my happiness is birthed over and over and over, moment by moment. And when I have something in my external environment that causes me to feel sad or angry or whatever, I can go into myself. I can reconnect to that love, infinite, everlasting, and allow that to seep through all the pores of my body, and remember that love is always present and therefore happiness is always present. This has been my biggest lesson of the last decade. Learning how to love myself. Learning why that is the true secret to sustainable happiness. So I encourage you to do everything you can to love yourself as deeply as possible. Make it a priority. Like I said at the beginning of the podcast, utilize tools that can help you along the way. I use essential oils. I use my journal. I use books that I read. I podcast. I use so many different things to support me, whatever I might need. And you get to do the same. If you want any of the things that I have to offer, adamroa.com is where you can go. Thank you for listening to this. If it's been helpful to you, please leave a review on iTunes. It means a lot to me. Just ask that as a favor. Subscribe, follow, I hope you have an amazing next decade. I hope that you are kicking off 2020 in just the right way for you to be the best version of yourself and create the life of your dreams. I want to remind you that always, in all ways, you are seen, you are heard, and you are loved.